all of my sermons, 20 years worth, about a little more than 2 bins, all divided by the books of the Bible and what I preached on. How many bins do you have, Bill?
I have a whole 2-drawer filing cabinet.
Yeah, there you go. Got a few years on it.
And I got some nice furniture for it too. It's good stuff.
Sure. It's kind of fun rereading them. They give a brief insight to what was going on culturally, politically, congregational life. Themes like climate change, racism, polarized politics, changing church culture, and stewardship seem to lead the list of topics and concerns. I pulled out the sermon from 3 years ago, and then 6 years ago on this text, and I'm afraid to admit that some of it is still worth repeating. It sounds a bit cliche, and yet history has a way of repeating itself, though the cast of characters may look a little different, though not this year with the same presidential candidates. 3 years ago, I cited the work from Eugene Peterson in the introduction to the book of Ephesians in the Message. And he writes, quote, "When we know about God and what we do for God have a way of getting broken apart in our lives. The moment the organic unity of belief and behavior is damaged in any way, we are incapable of living out the full humanity for which we were created." Paul's letter to the Ephesians joins together what has been torn apart in our sin-wrecked world. He begins with an exuberant exploration of what Christians believe about God, and then, like a surgeon skillfully setting a compound fracture, sets this belief in God into our behavior before God so that the bones, belief, and behavior knit together and heal. Once our attention is called to it, we notice these fractures all over the place. There is hardly a bone in our bodies that has escaped injury, hardly a relationship in city or job, school or church, family or country that isn't out of joint or limping in pain. There is much work to be done. And so Paul goes to work. He ranges widely from heaven to earth and back again, showing how Jesus, the Messiah, is eternally and tirelessly bringing everyone and everything together. He also shows us that in addition to having his work done in and for us, we are participants in this most urgent work. Now that we know what is going on, that the energy of reconciliation is the dynamo at the heart of the universe, it is imperative that we join in vigorously and perseveringly, convinced that every detail in our lives contributes, or not, to what Paul describes as God's plan worked out by Christ. A long-range plan in which everything would be brought together and summed up in him, everything in deepest heaven, everything on planet Earth. End quote. Words worth repeating yet again. A country and a culture that is fractured and changing in the middle of this election year. Candidates debated, and now a country wondering if both are fit for office, and now an attempted assassination. White nationalism and Project 2025 posing a threat to the ethos and integrity of what this nation was founded. The church locally and denominationally emerging and changing from the hold of a pandemic, and it is looking entirely different. An economy that has tightened its grip on the middle class and people wondering where the funds are for everyday needs. Things feel very unsettled. Things are unsettled. And yet, not all of this has to be bad news. We We definitely learn about ourselves at our institutions when things are in flux. We learn what stays and what needs to be let go. We learn what works and what doesn't work. We learn how to fly while building. And we learn how things can be knit together in new ways. We learn what we really stand for. On March 27th, 2024, the Public Religion Research Institute published an article entitled Religious Change in America, and the paper surveyed 5,600 adults from across the United States. And the article found that the unaffiliated is the only major religious category experiencing growth. Most unaffiliated Americans are not looking for a religious or spiritual home. Church attendance among Americans is down, and fewer Americans say religion is important, though most Americans who attend religious services do so to feel closer to God. Now, in some ways, I don't blame individuals for not wanting to attend worship anymore. The church and its leaders have divided and excluded individuals. The church and its leaders have often been so out of touch with reality and what's going on around, politically, culturally. The church and its leaders have told us who we can and cannot marry. The church and its leaders have told us who can speak and have leadership positions, who leadership has pronounced who is saved and who's in need of saving. The church has run on committee and board structures and Robert's rules and worshiping on Sunday as if that is the only way to worship and to do church life and to give thanks to God. The church has done a fine job of telling folks that they need to come to church in order to teach their kids the faith, and that coming to church is the only way to learn about the Bible. How is this sustainable? Was Jesus worried if we worshiped on Sunday or followed Robert's rules? Is it any wonder that people are not sitting in the pews any longer? And then an event such as yesterday happens. What can the church possibly say? Well, for starters, I've got something to say. For starters, the church is more than just a building. It's more than just sitting in the pew. We know we can gather virtually. We know that we can live stream our services. We can download it and watch it on Tuesday. We know we can have coffee in the fireside room in the narthex and even out in the parking lot if we want to. We know that cards and emails and messages and phone calls really do matter. We have stretched church muscle in ways we never thought possible. And now that we know how to do these things, does it matter? Does it still matter? And will it continue to matter? The letter to the Ephesians is written in the name of Paul, reminds us that we are all God's chosen people, deserving of God's grace all the time. God cares for humanity. God's inheritance through Christ is to show us that we are so much better together than apart. We have a story to share, especially to those who are curious about church, who Jesus is, and why do you gather and sing these hymns? And in light of this religious shift we are living in and through, how do we name it and talk about it? Or how do we keep building the plane while flying it? Back on July 8th, 2021, Diana Butler Bass, a Christian historian, wrote, quote, "Share your story with wisdom, grace, humility, and hospitality. When a major religious shift is underway, there's nothing more important than to tell your story. The people who are brave enough to walk into your doors, watch online, or spend time reading your website can't read your mind and don't remember the former pastor or the beloved member who died 20 years ago. They don't want to know when the building was renovated or who donated the windows. Your story isn't a timeline. It's about the spirit of community. what motivates you, where you find meaning, your hopes and fears and gifts. And she continues to say that mainline churchgoers, that's who we are, mainline churchgoers, generally assume simple things like infant baptism, the flow of the Christian year, and written liturgy and lectionaries. They know multiple verses of old-fashioned hymns. God, I love them. They like classical music and can tell the difference between a Calvinist and a Wesleyan. I don't know if I could anymore. Mainliners also regard private religious experience pretty highly. Don't wear their faith on their sleeve. Know lots of stuff about capital campaigns, bad sound systems, and broken air conditioners, and really like helping people. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, right? And funerals. Mainline churches do those well. In short, mainliners live inside a particular history and are shaped by poetic words. Remember the value of quiet faith and thoughtful reflection. Show God through the works of one's hands more than words, and understand failure and death. In other words, Diana Butler Bass writes, the practice of mainline Christianity is not always, but in large part, different than the assumed practices of most of American evangelicalism. Mainline types need to be prepared to explain that, to talk about all of it to newcomers. Assume nothing and be prepared to laugh and learn a few things about yourself in the process of knowing and telling your story. End quote. Our lives are more than just what happens on idyllic Sundays. Our lives are a kaleidoscope of work and family and a little bit of drama and opinions and politics, love, despair, and pain. More than ever, the church and its teachings need to be a part of that kaleidoscope, speaking with an eye on what we face and how God and the teachings of Christ would speak to and respond. For when we open the good book of teachings, the Bible, the prophets, Jesus, and God's Word have a lot to say about love and unity and forgiveness and reconciliation and, frankly, just plain human dignity and worth. This church, our denomination, and other mainline denominations have a lot to say about this, and people more than ever need to hear it, for we are better together than apart. And today's culture still needs the church, especially after what happened yesterday. I needed to hear the words of Ephesians. I needed to hear Christine read them again this morning to me and to really listen to them. I needed to hear the letter writer attributing his words to Paul. I needed to hear this letter writer's really long run-on sentence about being a blessing and about being made whole. The plan that God has for us continues to unfold right before our eyes if we take the time to notice the great plan of God to bring everything together in one marvelous unity in Christ. Catherine Matthews writes, quote, God is working this great wonder in every age and every day, in each of us and all of us together. When we ponder who God is and how God is, we get a sense of who we are as creatures formed lovingly in God's own image. The plan may be an ancient one, rooted long before the earth was created, but it stretches forward too, far into the future. And we have our own place within it in this moment of history. To live meaningfully in this moment, however, we need to see ourselves not only as heirs, as those who receive these blessings, but as ancestors as well. For God has an eye on all that will come after us and a grace-filled purpose for it all. In other words, God is not done with us yet. Church life is not going to end up like old jalopy in a junkyard. Church life is just going to look different in the years to come, and we know that to be true already because it already looks different. We look different. We know that we'll need to continue to be creative and financially savvy, and to be more in tune to our communities. In doing all this, we continue to leave a legacy of resilience and hope, light and love, and we need to keep talking about this. We cannot just stand here and pretend that this is all happening around us. We have to change with it. And we have to be a leader within the changing, so that individuals can hear the relevancy of what it means to be a part of a church community, what it means to stand for something, and what it means to be a church that values faith and love and children and our LGBTQ plus community and our neighbors that don't look like us. We stand for something. We have 129 years of experience, an experience that must be shared. Can you imagine what Paul would say if he saw the church today? I think he would be writing another letter. Let's do our part in writing our letter for this moment in time when the church is changing and culture is changing all around us. We are a part of the change, and we are sharing our story. A UCC congregation on the east side of St. Paul, whose ministry spans 129 and a half years. Anecdotally, Leota Axtell, who was our oldest member of the church, when she got to 100, she said that you are allowed to count the halves. So 129 and a half years, a congregation that worships in person and online, a community that tries to find ways to build connections, provide affordable childcare, and be a caring neighbor in an evolving neighborhood in St. Paul's East Side. Diana Butler Bass concludes her blog back in July of 2021 by writing this, quote, paraphrasing the words of the old Monty Python sketch, we're not dead yet. We've just been awaiting